So, good evening. How are you? Have you had a nice weekend? Did you have a lovely Father's Day?
Yes, I did. Thank you
Very
for
good.
asking.
Very good. It's a pleasure. I hope that you were not gifted a trip to the gay disco.
No, not at all. No, I spent some time with my family.
That's excellent, as one should. So, I have a wide array of questions, and I hope you will indulge us in an eclectic mix. So, one of the main questions people want to know is how do we maintain this natural order that seems to be something that is instinctive to people, but they can't quite grasp and they can't seem to, find an agreement about it with other people. Everyone thinks it's relative, but logos implies there is a natural order and it is not relative at all.
Yes, yes. The main the easiest way to get into that is that people do recognize a natural order all the
Yes.
time in certain areas. I remember a book written by a guy, Christopher Derrick, wrote a book called "Escape from Skepticism," and in that book he said two students showed up at his house in England, and they were arguing that you couldn't know anything for certain for an hour. And then one of the guys looks at his watch and says, "Oh my God, it's 5 o'clock. If
Yeah.
we don't leave now, we'll miss the train." Well, obviously, the mind knew something for certain right away as soon as you moved out of this kind of artificial atmosphere that you find in places like
Yeah.
university campuses. So it's been dishonest from the beginning. There are certain things that people
Yeah.
don't want you to know, or certain things that
Yeah.
people don't want to admit. But we all know
That's
that
right.
there's an order to the universe. There's an order to everything. And so the main way that they get around this is by saying, well, there's a difference between science and
Mm-hmm.
religion or something like that. And science is true, and religion may make you
Mm-hmm.
feel good, but it's not true. Well, that is a kind of crude contemporary dichotomy that doesn't hold up once you start talking about logos. Because once you start talking about logos, you realize that there
Mm-hmm.
is an order to everything and that your mind is part of
Right.
everything. It's not completely separate. Obviously, there's a difference between your mind and the tree outside there. But the one thing that they have in common is logos. And that's what I decided I'm going to start with because what I'm trying to say is there is a unified understanding of the universe that includes both your mind and the things outside your mind, and that this whole religion science dichotomy is a historical fallacy that came into being for particular reasons, which I discuss in the book.
That false dichotomy as well, I feel, is being really portrayed with this kind of modern battle of the sexes thing. I know it's been going on for a long time, but there is no war. It's a complementary relationship,
Absolutely.
not a combative relationship. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. The one issue where the mind and the body come together is sex. It's obvious. And this is the one instance where people are always rushing in to say, "Oh, that's your opinion. There's no truth. You can be whatever you want to be. You may think you're a boy, but
Mm-hmm.
you can be a girl," and blah blah blah, and all this other type of stuff. This is all complete. This is all complete mystification. It's
Yeah,
preposterous, but it's been a lie that's been told so long and
yeah,
so effectively by the media that many people have fallen into this trap,
yeah.
and they have acted on this false information. And let's be perfectly frank here, they've ruined their lives
Mm-hmm.
as a result of it. There's no faster way to ruin
Yes,
your life
yes.
than to get involved in sexual misbehavior. It is the fastest, simplest way to ruin your life. And there are so many ways you can
That's
do
right.
it that I don't have to go
Yeah,
into them here. I don't have to go into here.
yeah, yeah. But don't you know, Dr. Jones, that it's not that you can just be a boy or a girl. You can also be a trans animal as well as a different species. You can be an alien or an elf, and people are mutilating their bodies to match that mental kind of a manifestation of what they wish they were. Very, very extreme.
Yes, this is we're seeing the cruelest manifestation of this lie right now. So let's dial it back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit to what I consider the beginning. And the beginning of this was the illusion that you can somehow separate procreation from sexuality. Many people bought into that lie. It's known as contraception. And once you do that, once you open the path to the world where we live today. So that was a big issue when I was a teenager. I didn't quite understand it. I was too young to understand it, but that was a huge issue, and I've described it in Libido Dominandi as the form of social engineering that took place in the 60s, where the Catholic Church was deliberately subverted by the Rockefellers, not Catholic institutions, let me specify here, like Notre Dame University, that were paid to undermine the church's teaching. That illusion has led to other illusions. So, okay, it didn't work, now you're pregnant, but it doesn't matter because you can have an abortion and it's just a medical procedure, removing a few cells, and there will be no consequences of that. Well, that's a lie too. And as I said, one of the quickest ways to ruin your life is to have an abortion, because you will never get over it. I'm sorry, you will have a choice of either joining a militant political movement called feminism, which will try and calm your conscience because you feel guilty about it, or you can repent and come back to God, and God will use this oftentimes. He always uses evil to bring about good, and he can do this in your life too. So it's not a hopeless situation, but it is a bad situation. And so, again, all of these illusions have been, one has led to the other. And so the illusion in our day is that homosexuals can get married. We have a mayor of our illustrious city here in Indiana who considers himself married to another male.
And a Christian.
And he calls himself, and he will, not only that, he will lecture you. He will wag his finger at you as some type of inferior being because you don't understand the sublimity of sodomite marriage. So yes, that's part of the deal too. So this is just one more illusion that this false understanding of sexuality is generated.
I'm glad you brought up the topic of abortion. So it segues nicely into what I wanted to ask you next. Have you heard about that sex strike that the celebrity proxy warriors are promoting now because Alabama passed a more of a conservative abortion bill about 6 weeks, right? And so now they've discovered, well, shall I say rediscovered abstinence, because now they refuse to have sex if they can't on demand have an abortion as a result of it.
Well, anything that would get the starlets of Hollywood to close their legs and become chaste, I think is a good thing, okay? But
you're right, God turned it into a good thing.
I mean, we just watched the Me Too moral panic, which was basically Hollywood starlets who had slept with producers to get the job and felt disgusted at themselves, and then took it out on Harvey Weinstein.
Yes, scapegoated him, for sure.
They scapegoated him for basically the fact that they had to sleep on the casting couch to get the job.
The thing,
But to get back to is it Georgia or Alabama?
It was both, actually. I think they both are leading the charge, They refused to shoot any movies or anything in Georgia because of this bill, and now Alabama is...
Go build terror on the back lot in Hollywood.
Yeah, you've already had Hollywood.
Lady. So, but I think what we're seeing here is, I think what's going to happen is we're going to go back to a regional solution, because the abortion has not succeeded in becoming acceptable. It's never going to happen. I think, as a thought experiment, are the people, is the legislature in Georgia proposing a return to chattel slavery? No, they are not doing that, because everyone accepts the fact that that was a bad idea. Even though we practiced it, we're not going back to it. This is clearly not the case with abortion. This is clearly I would say the majority of the people of the United States have never accepted abortion. It was imposed on us by the Supreme Court. We didn't vote this in.
Yes.
It was imposed first in states like California and New York by Jews. Bernard Nathanson is the one who said that. He read his testimony. He will give you the inside story about how Jews imposed abortion in New York. Okay, so it's never been accepted, and I think the Supreme Court is ready to face the reality, and they're going to go to a regional solution. They're going to return it to the states and say, if you want to live here and you want to ban abortion, you have the power to do that. If the young ladies in Hollywood want to have an abortion, they can go back to Los Angeles, or they can go to Greenwich Village and have one up there.
That's right. I actually thought of a bit of a clever retaliation to this. I don't know if probably you remember this better than I do, but when I was younger, women used to threaten, "Oh, I'm going to have this baby and I'm going to sue you for child support." And women used to pop holes in condoms. I don't know why that is no longer in vogue. Now it's all of a sudden just easier to kill the baby rather than keeping the man responsible and accountable for his actions. I don't know why women claim to be liberated and yet let men off the hook after they've allowed them to defile them and also to degrade themselves personally. So I don't know, maybe we should go on a pregnancy protest and actually keep the babies on, out of spite, if not out of love.
I think the sexual act naturally wants to lead to procreation. I think that's what it's there for. It's programmed in that direction, and I think people who engage in that activity want it to be that way. And then they have second thoughts and create a mess out of that situation.
Yeah.
So
nature has its own built-in birth control. It's called not ovulating. So maybe women could recall.
I agree. I agree.
Yes, definitely. Now, you mentioned chattel slavery. Of course, that's not in relation to what we're talking about now, but I really like the way that you brought about St. Augustine's quote about a man has as many masters as he has vices. And I really thought that was very succinct and true, because sexual liberation is, in fact, kind of the opposite, right? You call it slavery, and it's a way of control over you through all of your lusts and sins and passions.
Right.
It's almost like that 1984 quote, "War is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery." I think people are confusing these euphemisms and kind of propagandist terms, freedom, liberation, for the exact opposite of what they're intended.
Right.
Yep.
Right. I think people are waking up to it too. All you had to do was give the explanation. I just got a letter, a really powerful letter from a man who succumbed to this vice. He was succumbed to the vice of masturbation and became enslaved by it. And then he read Libido Dominandi, and he became outraged. He became enraged because he finally realized that he had become a slave. He said he stopped masturbating because he was so full of anger.
Yeah.
So I think that's always a possibility, because we can't foreclose the possibility of conversion. I think we're always tending back toward logos in our lives. It's like wood, trying to hold wood underwater. It requires a lot of effort, and as soon as you release it, the wood pops up anyway. I think that we have all these vices, we have all these bad habits, and yet you're always tending in the opposite direction. I'm not trying to minimize the vicious nature of vice. Okay, that's what it is. It's vicious. But I'm saying that the human spirit is resilient and can resist it successfully, no matter what you've done.
I totally agree. I think you're right. You can't discount conversion. I mean, growing up, I grew up in a big city, and nothing was off limits, and it almost seemed weird to be normal. And I've completely turned my life into a different kind of domestic, natural, traditional lifestyle. And I'm actually shocked by my own self. And, the Logos does reach out to you, or you notice it and you realize you're going against the current, and it's easier to go with the current. So how do we then bridge this gap with other people? Maybe they're our friends, maybe they're family, maybe they're colleagues, but how do you bring up this topic, and how do you say it in a way to not put them off? Because people hear church and they're turned off. Oh, church is corrupt. There's all sorts of things going on there. Oh, but this is my lifestyle. It's who I love. I can't change who I am. I am who I am. Well, everyone can change, because if social engineering works, then change is clearly possible. So you can change. You don't have to be stuck in this lifestyle. So how do we lovingly bring people to the Logos?
I've always said I'm in favor of unprotected
Yeah.
intercourse, and I'm in favor of it in all of its
Right.
aspects. But there's part of what I've talked to people all over the world.
Hmm.
Had long conversations with a Muslim
Hmm.
woman, and in the beginning, we kept thinking, is this going to be Catholic Islamic dialogue? And I said, no, I don't really want to engage. I'm not really interested in that. I said, I'm interested in unprotected intercourse. Let's just be honest with each other. Let's just be open to where the conversation will go, because I think that logos is what we're engaging in. A logos will direct us along the path. If we get off the path, I think that the dialogue will stop.
Yeah.
The fact that we've continued for so long means that we're on the right path. And that's all I would say. All you have to do is be open,
Hmm.
open to the truth. And that's what I believe. That's why I believe in unprotected intercourse. The other thing is that life is too
Yeah.
short. Especially when you get to be my age, you realize life is too short to beat around the bush. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's discuss it honestly. And I think it will have a good outcome, because, there's no reason to fear this.
Hmm.
It's the truth.
I agree.
The whole point of logos, this whole discussion of logos, is that it started off with Greeks, Ionians, wondering about the universe and wondering, is it a good outcome or is it a bad outcome? And there were Greeks at a certain point who wrote plays called tragedies, who felt that the outcome is bad. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You offer up your daughter to the gods to get wind, and then your wife stabs you to death in your bathtub. And you resist the temptation to sleep with your friend's wife, and then the god Venus is upset, and you get trampled by your horses.
Fickle gods.
It's like one bad thing after another. And at a certain point, St. John took this tradition, took the word logos, and he said, no, it's a good outcome. There will be a good outcome here, because God is logos. It's not just geometry.
Yeah.
There's an actual guy out there, a person who is logos, and he's love too. And that's the whole force of the universe. You can call it gravity, but it's really love. And so there'll be a good outcome, so there's no reason to fear anything. And that was the big revelation that came when logos took a quantum leap forward through revelation. I mean, the Greeks, they took it as far as you could take it as a human being. And then suddenly something happened, God appeared, and he took it a step farther, because he revealed what he was from the inside. And it turns out he's three persons who are in love with each other. And that the one person begat the other. He didn't make them. God didn't make the Son. He begat the Son. And so the closest approximation you can have to the Trinity, which is what I'm talking about, is the human family. Because we now know that God the Father begat God the Son. This has huge ramifications that I'm trying to discuss in this book, because I did the chapter on, I was in Bavaria in October, I gave a talk there, and then I wrote something on Werner Heisenberg, because I was up in the mountain, I was on the Herzogstand, and I looked down, and there's the Walchensee, and that's where Heisenberg lived. And I got into this whole article, which is available on Amazon Kindle. It's called Werner Heisenberg and Jewish Science, where I'm talking about quantum mechanics. And I said in the article, it was a dead end, because these people, this was materialism. Materialism is basically atoms in the void, and these people thought they were philosophers, and they thought the ultimate reality is these balls bumping into each other, called atoms. And if you got to the ultimate reality, you knew everything. Well, it turns out it was a dead end. Heisenberg split the atom, it all disappears anyway, and that the reality that they should have been concerned about was the family, because that was the real social atom. And if you split up the nuclear family, you create a nuclear explosion in society, which will wreck your society, which is what happened in Germany at that
Yeah,
time. That's exactly what the sexual revolution was.
absolutely.
So the whole thing about the Trinity and let's say Hegel's misappropriation of the Trinity just convinced me that that is the ultimate
Hmm.
reality. And that the family is the closest approximation to the Trinity, and that's why it's so important.
Absolutely. And of course, there's nothing more important than the family. The family is a representation, as you said, of the Trinity and of the natural order of things. But in this day and age, things are so degenerate and so degraded. I guess if we would have to choose between having abortion or sterile sex and having the single motherhood, which also is not good, or single parenthood, what would be, obviously at least life has come of it, so that would be the greater good. But of course, that's not good for families and society in general either, because those children that are then prey to God knows what is going to be pushed on them. The mothers are then exploited. So, what's better? What do you think is the lesser of the two evils?
Well, if you're pregnant right
Yeah,
now and you're not
yeah,
married, uh, don't have an abortion
I agree.
because that's really bad.
Yeah.
That's really bad. So, okay, it's a bad
Mhm.
situation. You should not be in a
Mhm.
situation where you need to raise this child on
Mhm.
your own. Okay, that's why God created
Mhm.
fathers. That's why we celebrate Father's Day.
That's
Okay,
right.
but if you're in that situation, you can always make it worse by having an
That's true.
abortion. So God will bring. It's easier to bring good out of for
Yeah.
you if the child is
Yeah.
alive, because I don't care, you can go to confession, and that's the church provides this outlet
Mhm.
for you. The sin can be
Mhm.
forgiven, but you'll never get over the
Mhm.
fact that one day you're going to wake up and you think, gee, my child would be 20 years old now or something like
Yeah.
that. You'll never get
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah.
Okay, and it would be better not to have to go through life with thoughts like that.
Absolutely. And I find that one of the main vehicles for pushing that message, as if abortion is some sort of ultimate good or some kind of human right, is this whole feminist camp. And now there's this male equivalent, the MGTOW. Have you heard of it? The men going their own way thing. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. It's both like a kind of a Marxist separate the sexes and make them fight rather than uniting them. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's what feminism
Right.
was. I mean, so I get back. So let's go
Yeah.
back to the development of logos in
Hmm.
history. Say Empedocles said the whole universe is love and strife,
Hmm.
and then Saint John came along and he said, no, it's love. And then Hegel came along and said, no, it's strife.
Yeah.
And then Marx came along and made up a system called strife, and it's called communism, which is basically class
Yes.
conflict. And then a Jewish lady by the name of Betty Friedan, Betty Goldstein Friedan, transposed. She was a communist in her youth, and all she did was transpose class conflict into gender conflict. The war between the sexes replaced the war between the
Yeah.
classes. And that has had horrendous consequences to this
Hmm.
day. I mean, it's not
Hmm.
what it was like in the 1970s when I got fired for opposing it, but it's still bad. It is still
Yeah.
bad. And the net result is you have people who just can't connect.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Hmm.
sexes, they can't connect with each other. This is a horrendous
Hmm.
situation because the future, in effect, depends on male and female connecting.
Absolutely.
And if they don't connect and have children, there's no
That's right.
future. So it's a serious, absolutely serious, and we need to come up with, what should I say, better mechanisms to allow people, to male and female, to connect. But the first step toward this is to remove the manacles on your mind.
Yeah.
And feminism is it manacles on your
Yeah.
mind, and I think that's the male is the reaction to it. Let's go
Hmm.
back one step. Feminism was a reaction to the sexual
Hmm.
liberation of the 60s.
Hmm.
Okay, the women felt that they were being used sexually, and they were, and so they created this movement that now has the opposite effect. Now these people have been so schooled in the school of sexual conflict that the men are
Hmm.
intimidated. The men are intimidated, and of course the people who rule the culture know this, and that's why they provide
Hmm.
homosexuality, which fear of the opposite, phobia of the
Hmm.
opposite, and pornography.
Yeah.
as a way to keep the sexes separated, because that's the way they control the
Yeah,
culture.
definitely. And so many things stem off from feminism. This idea of a career being the highest goal a woman can achieve. Well, that's obviously not the primary need of a person. You know, having a family is the highest goal, really, because that's what you're made to do. You know, cells divide, people, animals
Right,
understand this, plants understand that they
right.
reproduce, but somehow people don't. The most educated people
And
don't.
who
Yeah,
right? And who would tell you this? Someone who's interested in exploiting your
that's
labor.
right.
I've seen this firsthand. A woman on the park bench in Greenwich Village in New York City telling another woman that her life was over. She would burst into tears sitting on her couch at midnight eating her cheese sandwich because she had dedicated her entire life to the law firm that she worked for. And that law firm not only extracted every erg of labor from her life, it prevented her from forming a family. And so there's no one
Yep.
left. And she said, my life is over. You think about
Yep.
that, ladies.
Yep.
Think about that, because there's a deeper element to this too. And because I've just finished the Hegel chapter, there's a sense in which you don't become who you are until someone accepts you. Another person has to accept you before you can become who you are.
Yeah.
That's Hegelian. It's kind of Trinitarian, but I think it's true. You're nobody. Dean Martin used to say, "You're nobody till somebody loves you."
That's right. I'm.
I think there's a profound
Yeah.
truth in
No.
that. And
Yeah.
I will be married 50 years
Oh,
in August.
congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That is exactly
Thank you.
the kind of person we need to get marriage advice from, is someone who's been happily married like you.
Well, I'm not giving marriage advice, but
Okay, I'll scratch that off the
I'm
list.
saying, I'm saying that the person I am now is not the person I was before as a 20-year-old, because nobody is.
Yes.
Let's face it, nobody
Yeah.
is. And I could have head into a direction. I could have become much worse without that, but I became much better. So the best, I'm always talking about the best thing that ever happened to my life, to me in my life. And the best thing, I've said, getting fired at St. Mary's was one of the best things. Getting married was one of the best things. And the other best thing was getting stuck in a traffic jam on the way to Woodstock. In many ways, that's the story of my life. I got stuck in a traffic jam on the way to
Oh, no.
Woodstock.
Oh my
Anyway,
goodness. I think that story about that girl on the park bench, you picked up on something that I was going to ask you, and it's exactly spot on. It seems to me that it's women doing this to other women. It's like the old spinster who didn't get married and it's too late for her, so now she wants to drag down the pretty young girls so that they don't have a chance either, and then they can be like senior citizen ladies at these women's marches protesting why it's
yes,
a good thing to kill your babies because she's killed 4 of hers. So you have to
that's right.
outcompete her now.
I think
It's like, you've been to Iran, so you maybe are familiar with some of the like FGM practices in that in some of those cultures. It's women who do it to other girls. The older women, it's like a kind of a rite of passage, will do it to them. That what kind of feminism is it that women are hurting other women? It just makes no sense.
no, misery loves
Yeah.
company. I think that's the explanation of what you're
Yeah.
talking about. And it's also, it's not just true of feminism. It is certainly true of homosexuality. It is absolutely
Yes.
homosexuality. Because there is a father deficit that sets the child up as a potential homosexual. But it is sexualized by an older adult who seduces him sexually. This is the interesting question I'd like to pose to our gay mayor. Did that happen to you?
Yeah.
Did that happen to you? Was that a good thing that happened to you? That some older man sexualized this need in you of father deprivation? Was that a good thing? And if you say yes, are you willing to do that too?
Yeah.
Are you going to be
Perpetuate.
involved in that?
Yeah.
Perpetuate this cycle of deviance?
And they'll never
But,
admit it, even if they were. They'll say, "No, I had a great childhood." Okay. Well, clearly not.
Well, he's written about it. He's written about it in his autobiography, and he was talking about as being at the father's dinner table and listening to all the professors. one of those older men probably acted and on
Mhm.
and seduced him as a child.
Statistically, that is probably the most likely thing. It's a family member or a friend of the family, oftentimes, who has the access to do those things. So who knows? Who knows? So then, let me
Right.
ask you, given that now I don't know if in all of the states same-sex marriage is legal, but in general, it's become popular now to adopt children or to hire women as surrogate mothers. And actually, there's a lot of health complications that come with that. But what do you think about fathering or mothering, I suppose, in male or female relationships, about adopting and them having a family, quote?
No, no. Look, you can't separate procreation from sex.
Hmm.
Okay, it goes both
Hmm.
ways. Before
Yeah.
in the 60s, people wanted to have sex without procreation. Now people want to have procreation without
Hmm.
sex. And by
Oh, good
sex,
one.
I mean the actual act of sexual intercourse between a man and a woman in a lifetime relationship. That's what sex is. Anything else is a perversion of sex or a parody of sex. And if there's ever a parody of this, it is the idea that two women can somehow have a child, or two men can somehow have a child. This is also a
Hmm.
narcissistic fantasy that these people share,
Hmm.
that shows you how
Hmm.
disconnected they are from reality. That you could believe that
But
you could believe that
mhm,
as a
mhm,
sign that I don't want you with the nuclear football in your hands. Okay.
yeah. And now with the whole transgender thing, now men can have children too. So it's almost it's taking away any sort of womanhood from women. It's very strange that we're now letting men into women's spaces, and now women have to be comfortable with that. Like, look, I'm no feminist or anything, but this is pretty misogynistic to say that a man is equal to a woman when we're clearly different. And they're coming into women's
Well,
sports, they're taking
yeah,
first prize, they're bashing the heads in of women and giving them concussions in a wrestling match. That's not wrestling. That would be domestic violence in
right.
any other
You,
setting. This is
First of all,
outrageous.
women wrestling with each other is probably not a good idea. But
That's ridiculous too. Unless there's
but,
jello.
but would you want to wrestle with a man? No, I don't think so.
Maybe in a playful,
But that's
loving
not
way.
called wrestling anymore. That's called something else.
No, no. That's right. That's right. I just don't understand why women are now have to accept this, that men can be women too. I don't know why we can't call it for what it is.
Well, they've been forced to accept so much
Yeah.
along the way that this is only like the next step. It didn't happen overnight, but you've accepted so much. Even let me say, even
Mhm.
Iran.
Mhm.
You know, the people are nice. They're the politest people in the
Yes.
world. Their government absolutely, and they call America the Great Satan on a regular
Mhm.
basis.
Mhm.
But they've pretty much adopted feminism as part of their educational system, and so the women are now reaching a point where they're in their 30s and they have a degree in nuclear physics, but they're not married and not having children.
Yeah.
And so there's an unhappiness there, and they can't articulate it. They just cannot articulate it. At least over here, we have groups of people that can articulate it
Mhm.
and say where it came from. But that's the problem in Iran. So you give a talk, and I gave a talk in a mosque,
Mhm.
and the men are there, and I said, "How many of you men have children?
Mhm.
How many are married? How many have children?" Not one man had one child.
Wow, not one.
And this is I said, well, you got 20 years to solve this problem, because if you don't, Persia will go out of existence after 2,500
Yeah.
years. Now that's a long run when
Mhm.
it comes to civilizations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I said something similar at another venue, and the girl comes up to me afterwards and she says, "No one's ever talked to me like this
Mhm.
before." And I said, "Yeah, I understand that. That's why I'm here.
Yes.
That's why
That's why
that's
we
why
have
I
you
love
here. And
talking
thank you for
to
that.
you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but it is true, because someone has to open up that conversation in
Absolutely.
Iran, because they have The only thing holding Iran together right now is Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump. They have created, when you have when you're threatened with war,
Yes.
it unites the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
If the threat were to disappear, the country would fall apart, and you'd have to have this discussion.
Yeah.
It will have to take place sooner or later.
So is that why America's perpetually at war? Just keeps you together. No, I'm really glad you picked up on the education part, because it seems to me that all of these agenda driving institutions like the UN and all these NGOs, education for women is the key. It's going to solve everything. World peace will come when women are educated. But it almost seems like, on the face of it, you can't argue that you want women to be stupid and not educated. Of course, you want women to be educated, but not to the extent that you spend your best child rearing fertile years at school. School is not going anywhere. That university will be there. Work will always be there, unfortunately. So just have your kids, let them grow up, and you'll still be young. Then you can go and focus on whatever after.
Well, the problem is that feminism was an excuse to drive down the birth rate anyway. So it was dishonest program. It was programmed in there. I was at the United Nations conference in Cairo in 1994, and everyone was saying education is the best contraceptive. So that they clearly thought of it as an instrument to achieve another type of end. Now, as I said, we're not against education.
Of course.
But if education means that you're not going to be able to have children, then it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. I mean, one of my sons brought home some young lady, and I said to her, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to law school.
Oh, God. I almost went to law school.
I said, okay, now you're going to go to law school. Can you explain to me why there's an inverse ratio between education and fertility?
Oh.
And she said, I never thought about that. And I said, well, it's true. And she said, yeah, you're absolutely right, because everyone who dropped out of school has a child.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We'll go to school. The longer you go in education, the fewer children you have. True. Now, as I said, the oligarchs figured that out a long time ago, and they were saying explicitly that at the Cairo population conference. Yeah. But if you want to have a successful culture, as opposed to a culture that simply sucks the labor out of women and throws them away, then you're going to have to come up to some type of modus vivendi where women can get educated and have children.
Yeah. No, it's true. Throughout my undergraduate and my master's, I only saw maybe 2 or 3 younger girls that were pregnant, and this is out of like tens of thousands of people who attended this institution, and maybe like a couple who were older who came back to school. That's it. There's very few people having children, and they all say, I want my career first. Yeah, but a career takes tens of years to establish if you have one. Most people have jobs.
Be careful what you pray for.
Yeah. Yeah, you just might get it. Now, a more
right.
That's right.
Be careful what you pray for, ladies.
A more troubling thing with education, though, is the level of intensity and explicit content that children receive in their sexual education courses. This is happening now in primary schools. I think it's too much, too fast. What do you think? I mean, it's one thing to teach teenagers before they enter adulthood proper sexual relations, but children in their single digits of age sitting on a drag queen's lap reading a book and learning about anal sex, that's too much. It's outrageous. It's happening everywhere, especially in Canada, America, Britain, everywhere.
That's happening in South Bend. It's literally happening in South Bend, Indiana now that we have the gay mayor. That's happening. The big right. And the net result of that, let's say 30 years ago, when my children were small, was homeschooling. A mass exodus from the public schools. And the public schools in Indiana have never recovered. They have never recovered. And at a certain point, the legislators in Indianapolis had to admit this fact. And so they created vouchers. Because the public school, the social engineers overplayed their hand.
No, homeschooling.
And the people did not stand around. The parents took their children out of schools, and now those, the schools have failed. You would never thought of this, but it happened. Something as big as a public school system can fail, and it's failing now.
Yeah, a lot of people are considering the homeschooling route, but other people think that it's funny, like, oh, you're not going to be able to teach them properly. Well, I think you are because you just take the same materials and pass the same tests. So that's really quite ridiculous. So I suppose maybe what is when we're talking to young ladies who are, for example, really into the feminism, how do we tell them that, look, you're kind of on the wrong path, you're misled, that is not going to be the best outcome for you? How do we convince them that, there are other goals, that their priorities are just a little bit, it's noble that they want to use their talents, but maybe they're missing the bigger picture, that it's meant to kind of subvert society rather than to empower you. That's not really the goal. You thinking you're empowered means
Yeah.
you don't connect with other people.
I used to say to my children all the time, experience keeps an expensive school, but fools will learn in no other. And
Yes,
that's
indeed.
a sad
That's a
fact of
good one.
human life that I know lots of people who finally came to that understanding that you're talking about human
Yeah.
sexuality, but it's too late. And this is
Yeah.
especially true for women because they have a very limited window of opportunity here in terms of being able to bear children. And you can easily, very easily exceed that window now. I went through this with my youngest son and his wife, who were dancers at the Cincinnati Ballet. That art world and that ballet, they will take you and they will suck every erg of labor from your body and throw you away like a Dixie cup when you're 35 years old. And you be an ex-dancer at the age of 35, and suddenly you passed your opportunity. Now, this is the worst thing about it is when you get into this environment, they encourage transient sterile relationships. That is the norm in the art world or in the ballet. And so you're supposed to hook up with somebody for the time, and then suddenly his or her contract gets canceled, and suddenly that's the end of your relationship. Well, my son and his wife defied that. They got married. Okay, now that's not all that
I love this
usual.
story.
There are people in the ballet world who do get married. Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yay.
what happened is that the ballet director, this is a book I've written called How Meyer Lansky Took Over the Cincinnati Ballet. It's on Kindle if you want to read it. But anyway, at this point,
Definitely.
they invite everyone in the ballet company to the wedding, which is at Old St. Mary's Catholic Church in over the rock, Cincinnati. And
Nice.
everyone shows up except the ballet director. Okay. And she
Of course.
becomes like Caraboss in Sleeping Beauty. If you know that ballet,
Yeah.
the one fairy that did not get invited shows up and she's furious and she puts a curse on the child. Well, Caraboss did get invited to this wedding, and she didn't show up, and she put a curse on my children's marriage by firing my son and promoting his wife. That was That was an assault on his marriage, and my daughter-in-law was so outraged that she got pregnant.
That pregnancy protest I was talking
And
about, it's effective.
not only that, she inspired everyone in the ballet was so sick of doing the sex
Yeah.
robot dance, which is like another word for modern dance. And they were so sick of transient sterile relationships that what you had was an epidemic of pregnancy, unprecedented in the ballet world. 4 women got pregnant
Wow.
as a result of Courtney's
Well
example.
done.
So I thought it was a story that was worth telling because it epitomizes the situation that all young people are put in right now. That everyone is supposed to think of this career as why aren't you thinking about it in the real perspective? It's not liberation for you. It's a chance for the people who pay your salary to exploit you, to exploit your
Yeah.
labor. That is what feminism is. They are taking all that energy that you could be devoting to your child and building up your family as this unit that will protect all of you from the predations of this mean world. And they're sucking it into the law firm and giving you some type of money for billable hours in exchange. There's nothing they can give you that will be an exchange for your
That's
life.
right. That's the most sinister thing about it. It's not just a job where you clock in, you give some time, you give some labor, and you clock out and you go home to your family. Now it's like you might get an email in the middle of the night. You might have to do this. You might have to travel suddenly. They take your soul. They take your life, as you said. It's not just some of your time and labor. It's far more sinister than that, and I think that's the real evil of it, really.
Yes, that's why we do vampire movies, because we feel that there are these vampiric
Yeah.
forces out there that are basically sucking the life out of us. Well, they're
Yeah.
true. It's true. They are. And the first thing you need to do is to get over. Don't internalize the commands of your
That's
oppressors.
right. I
Don't take their commands as some type of virtuous behavior. That's not what
That's
this
right.
is. No matter what they tell you, this is not virtuous behavior. It's ruthless financial exploitation, robbing you of a life.
No, that's completely right. And I mean, where did this sexualization come from? I mean, of course, through ancient history, there was orgies and this and that, but for the most part, society was intact. There was always families, and there was always there was never an option not to have it. That's what you would do. You inherited your father's work. Your mother was there to raise you, and you did the same thing. The Bible says once you leave your parents, you cleave to your spouse. People are
Right.
not doing that. Do you think it's a lack of that kind of moral upbringing, or is it all of this? I'm in psychology, so I feel somewhat responsible. All of this Freudian repressed sexual desires, because you talked about Wilhelm Reich
No.
and all of this stuff, and
Well, I mean, yeah,
yeah.
I discuss this in Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control, which is a history of psychology. It's a history of modern psychology, but we're also talking about technology here. We're talking about the development of technology and the understanding of how to keep people under control. More and more sophisticated forms of control that are all dependent on technology. So I mentioned in that book the Marquis de Sade trying to mobilize the people, the French, to keep the French Revolution going. How do you do that? Well, it's based on passion. So how do you incite passion? Well, have the women exhibit themselves naked in the theater. That's what he said. Well, you got a problem here. If it's a real big theater, the women are hard to see if you're sitting in the back row.
That's a
And if
problem.
it's a small theater, well, they're easier to see, but that you don't have that many people. And this is a technological problem that got solved by
Yeah.
film
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
television and internet and all. And these then became the vehicles of pornography, which then became the vehicles of social control. So all of these things are technological developments. But I'm saying the main technology here is the technology of human control, using passion as a form of human control. That's where Wilhelm Reich comes in and people like that.
So then let me ask you, since we're fighting a culture war, how do we reclaim the culture? How do we get all of this, I don't want to sound out of date, but the smut and the gratuitous nudity and sex and the gory violence and all of this stuff? Look, we're not virgins, we're not prudes, but it's too much. Like, I actually look away at some of these scenes that have like full frontal nudity, or really, like, it's basically pornography short of seeing the phallus. So how do we reclaim that? Because it's everywhere. Advertising has it, everything has it. So it's inescapable. You're constantly bombarded. You can't even buy a sandwich without being aroused.
It's yes. I said I was interviewed by the New York Times when I got to Tehran, and he said, "What's your impression?" And I said, "He says, your first time here?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's your impression?" I said, "Desexualization." I was suddenly put into a culture where women covered themselves completely, and the public sphere had been completely desexualized. We have no power over that, but it's desexualizing itself. These films are becoming more and more desexualized because they're moving more and more away from actual sexuality into perversions. They are unsexual. They're not sexual, asexual. But I mean, you can't. That being true. That being said, the surest protection is the family, is the home. because that's where you create a life, and you create a kind of microcosm where you can filter out things. I mean, it's difficult. It's not easy, but it's possible. And so basically the story of my marriage and having children is basically trying to filter out what is bad, but not creating the sense that you're completely isolated at the same time. You know, we want to foster, and to be honest with you, I mean, so we did homeschooling because for the three youngest, it didn't work with the two oldest, but with the three youngest, it worked because they were close in age. So, but a great combination with homeschooling was ballet, because the kids could go out and they could it's exercise, it's art at the same time. You're with other people. You've got to focus. You got to put on the Nutcracker this year. That's the focus of every year when you're in ballet. And you meet other people, and I think it was successful. So you have to establish the family. If you don't do that, you're going to just be an individual, and you won't be strong enough as an individual. No one is strong enough as an individual by himself. You need other people for support, and the basis of that support, the most crucial support, is in the family. And that's where you can screen out most effectively all of these other bad influences. And you will be motivated to do this because you will have children, and you don't want your children exposed to this kind of stuff.
That's right. Yeah. So I guess if we can't necessarily reclaim, Hollywood and TV and all that and other types of media, then I suppose the best thing we can do is that local community, starting with the family, to, I don't know, make modesty in vogue again or something, just to foster these good values and to just maybe not show certain things at the local cinemas. Is that something that we can do? Like, how
all of those technologies are changing. Like the local cinema, you've got pornography has been completely shifted off, I think, from the local theater, that's what was happening in the 70s. Deep Throat played at regular movie theaters. That's not happening anymore. That's not happening anymore. This is all evolving. We noticed the evolution changing with the VCR. So we never had a television. I would never allow a television in my house. Years later, I heard that Father Feeney said, having a television in your home is like having a Jew in your living room. It was funny. Okay. But what? So I never.
I'm sorry.
I never had a television. So at a certain point, we got the VCR, and so we had total control over the content. I still don't think that's a good thing. I still think that the VCR, whatever it is now, whether it's Netflix now or whatever it is, it robs you of communal time. It robs you of time. I started playing music. I got back into music around the year.
I've seen you play. Is that what is that little?
It's a mandolin.
Mandolin, that's it.
Yeah,
that was good.
And that is a great way to get the family together. And I tried, but then the family my daughter, we did a CD. My son ended up in the ballet. He's not interested in playing folk music anymore. My daughter-in-law, who was the one playing the accordion, she's back in Detroit. She had 8 children, so she's too busy with that. But when they're small, when you have this captive audience, it's great. Yeah. It's absolutely great. And I really recommend Irish music. We have friends up in Grand Haven, and the guy is a musician, and he said, he was homeschooling. What should we do? I said, try Irish music. It was incredibly successful. Incredibly successful. They got the entire town, 3-year-olds showing. It's amazing to stand there and watch a 3-year-old play a tune on a tin whistle. It's amazing what children can do when it comes to music. And so it was fantastically successful, and I recommend it as something that families should be doing.
I agree. I'm so glad you brought up music, because one of the things I really wanted to ask you is there any modern music that isn't utter tripe? Like, is there anything that has some logos in the music? I mean, you're not going to get people listening to classical music, even though I personally really enjoy it. But what do you think is
folk music? That's what folk music is.
Yeah.
First of all, Ray Fun Williams wrote a book in which he said all music is folk music. So, and he was talking specifically about Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the greatest achievements in musical history. He said if you bumped into him on the street, he would speak German to you. Well, he spoke German musically as well. His mind was full of German tunes from the beer hall or from the church or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
those tunes got transmuted into something sublime because he was a genius. Now, though the Irish were, I'm half Irish and half German, okay? I'm biracial, I have multiple personality disorder. But the Irish were never in the situation as the Germans because they were a conquered race. The English had conquered them, the Protestants had subjugated them.
Yeah.
But they held Irish culture together even after the penal laws had banned musical instruments. Because and they have this huge reservoir of Irish dance tunes that we played for years at the local Irish pub. Your family will never exhaust this repertoire of music, and it's all accessible. And the logos of this music is immediately apparent, even to a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Even to a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And that's why I recommend folk music. Now, you can say the Germans have a rich folk music tradition. The Irish have a great tradition as well.
Yeah.
You probably don't have any ethnic roots anymore. I mean, most people come here, and the commercial music has driven all of this out of your mind, and so you don't come to it naturally, but you can still pick it up. I mean, I'm lots of people have.
I'm really glad that you brought up the Irish culture and everything, because one of the things that seems to keep coming up is people being labeled this nonsense term that you've also talked about, white. White is not a thing, just the same as blacks have a multi-ethnic kind of makeup, whites as well. Like what exactly are white people? And it's very funny that people like to ignore that Irish had it just as bad as the blacks had it. Irish need not apply, no blacks, no Irish.
Right.
And yet that no one seems to talk about that, as if everyone is a homogenous group when you're white, but everyone else is unique and diverse and a minority. So how do we battle against these labels?
Yeah, well, I've battled. If you've seen my YouTube videos, I'm battling with white guys all the time.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying it's not an identity. I mean, the greatest triumph of the social engineers was to convince Polacks living in Chicago to move to the suburbs and call themselves white.
Yeah.
It was a catastrophe because there's no content, and what you're seeing now, like an abortive demonstration like the Charlottesville thing. All these poor guys were lured into a trap because they thought they were white.
Yeah.
As soon as you say you're white, then you're a racist. And as soon as you're a racist, you're wrong on everything. And they completely can disregard any rights that you might have, which is precisely what happened to those poor guys.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Don't internalize the commands of your oppressors. I talked about the biker rally. The biker rally, some guy yelled, "Hey, asshole," and everybody turned around. So do you turn around when someone yells, "Hey, asshole"? Well, this is like the business of, are you white or are you what you really are? Because if you're turning around when they call, "Hey, whitey," you're going to get in trouble. They're out to get you.
That's right. That's right. And this whole notion that whites are seeking some sort of supremacy, that is just utterly untrue. They're probably the most, currently in society, the most kind of meek and mild-mannered type of people. They're not seeking anything. They're afraid to report a crime lest they be demonized in some sort of way. So It's just outrageous that other groups can have superiority. Yeah. Go ahead.
There's a term called white privilege. It's completely preposterous. If there's one group in this culture that does not have privilege, it is the white people.
Yes.
By the
seemingly white people
find themselves as white, you have lost all privilege whatsoever.
Yep. That's right. I completely agree. I want to talk a little bit about the faith and how we can communicate that to other people. A lot of people have good or bad experiences with religion, but of course, ultimately they think, oh, I'll just be a good person. I don't need that sort of intrusion in my life. And so how do we kind of convince them that you do, though? Because there is no salvation without accepting this. So how do we say that without putting people off and without seeming overzealous, for example?
Look, all you have to do is sit around and wait. And that's what I'm doing because they will report to you because they know that their lives are out of control.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people out there. Now, all you have to do is say sexual liberation is a form of political control. And suddenly you get emails by the dozens of people saying, you're absolutely right. I'm completely enslaved to this vice. What do I do? It's going to happen naturally because these people, like the generation, the millennial generation, the people that grew up with pornography on their cell phones, you know that you're enslaved. You know the instrument of the slavery, but you need someone to tell you how it works, and that's all I've done. So now you know that you're a slave to your passions. So now what do you do? Well, I can tell you you're a slave to your passions. I can explain to you how that happened, but my word does not have the power to bring you out of that. There's only one person whose word has power of that sort, and that's God. And that's why you have to turn to God because you can't do it on your own. At a certain point, you have to realize, I can't do it. I am power. I know I'm a slave. I'm powerless. I don't know what to do. At that point, you have to turn to someone who does have the power. And there's only one person who has that power, and that's God.
That's right. Yep.
You know, that's the Logos, the ultimate Logos, the Logos incarnate. And if you want to have a successful life, you have to turn to him because you can't do it on your own. It would be nice. I have reached the point with many people all over the world where they completely accept the philosophy of Logos. And they understand you're absolutely right. There is a Logos to the universe, and I agree with your description of it. But then I say, well, the next step is to make connection, actual connection. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, baptism. Wait a minute. Why do I have to do that? I don't know. I didn't make up the rule. It's not my rule. So the question is, you say you're going to make this connection. Are you going to do it on your terms, or are you going to do it on the terms of the Logos incarnate?
What is it that people seem to think that they can do it on their terms? Like, have you seen? You guys are now putting up statues of the Baphomet, and you have the Church of Satan, and now there's 1 million witches now confirmed in America. These people who what do you say to these people who are clearly going down the wide path that many will enter, not the narrow path that few will enter? So how do we deal with this?
You say experience keeps an expensive school that fools will learn in no other. So you can learn this lesson through experience, in which case it'll be too late to rescue your life. Or you can learn it the easy way, which is by paying attention to the Logos. We tend to not understand, especially when you're your age as opposed to my age, that we have a limited amount of time here.
Yeah.
And the limited amount of time is the only time you're ever going to get. It's the only time you're going to get, because at a certain point, I mean, I had this experience. My oldest son's father-in-law was raised in the Soviet Union. He was an atheist. He's on his deathbed, and I said, pretty soon your entire life is going to be nothing but past, because we're all going to die, and you're probably going to die before I will. And he did. He died a week ago.
I'm sorry.
And I said, there's only one way. This has a good ending. I said, there's only one. You will leave this life, and you will go to your maker, and you have to stand there and account for that past which you can't change anymore. The past is something you can know, but you can't change it. The future is something you can't know, but you can change it. So you have a limited time now to change that past by accepting baptism. So he accepted baptism, and he died.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so there's a happy ending to the story.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It is a happy. It is a happy ending, and everybody was happy. But I had to propose the issue. I had to force the issue, in a sense, by going to the hospital bed and saying, look, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking on all of us. And it doesn't just have to be death. Your reproductive life can die. It will die at a certain point. And at that point, the possibility of children, that's out of the question now. You can still go to heaven if you don't have children, but you will not have that possibility anymore. You know, that's something that people need to keep in mind.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you brought him to that place. So I've just got a few like kind of rapid fire questions that I thought we could go through, and then I shall release you. And I again thank you very much for your time. So I saw your tweet the other day, and I thought that made me laugh. You were talking about pornography, and you said don't clean your room. Was that a underhanded jab at Jordan Peterson because that's one of his stupid little truisms, like clean your room?
I have to admit it was, yes.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
I hope
Thank
George
you.
Peterson wasn't offended, but yeah, it was.
Oh, please. What do you think of him? Do you think he's a charlatan and a shill, or do you think he
Who,
is,
who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? I mean,
that's right.
I have this incident in my mind where he's got a big audience there, and someone in the audience asked him if he's read Solzhenitsyn's book 200
Yes.
Years Together. And he looks like a deer in the headlights
Yes,
because
I
the
got
book is
that.
about
Yep.
it's the history of Jews in Russia.
Yeah.
And he's suddenly it's the Jewish question. He doesn't
In
want to
Soviet
talk
Union.
about this
Yep.
thing. So he stalks off to the side of the stage. He looks like Hamlet. He looks like Hamlet. I don't know. And then he comes back, picks the
Yeah.
microphone up, and he says, "I can't do
Yeah.
it," and that's it.
Swooning
So I
Victorian.
feel sorry. I feel sorry for Jordan because he
That's
can't
right.
discuss. Why can't we discuss a book by Solzhenitsyn? He won the Nobel Prize. Why can't you? That's all. That's the question I have to ask.
He, he only likes the Gulag Archipelago. That's all he's got. His repertoire. And what about, do you know who Milo Yiannopoulos is?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think about him? Because he has quite an eclectic title. He is a gay, married to a black man, conservative, Catholic Jew, and a self-proclaimed Zionist. I have his book, and that's what he called himself. So, what do we make of this person? Yay or nay?
Uh, inco- Incoherence is what
Indeed.
I
Indeed. Combined
lack
contradiction.
lack of integrity is what I see when you have all of these competing identities. You don't have a real identity, so you're trying to make up in quantity what you lack in quality. But there's a bright guy. He should just get his passions under control
Yeah.
and head toward Logos. It's that
Agree.
simple.
Agree. He could make a girl very happy. He's a pretty boy.
Good-looking guy. He's a good-looking.
Yeah, he's a very good looking guy. Yeah, even my husband said so. So what do you think about this kind of false paradigm of left, right, conservative, liberal? Like, in my personal opinion, I think that these are just fragmented elements of a whole. Like, I don't think any one single person only cares about taxes or only cares about whatever issue du jour. I think it's another way to divide people rather than uniting people. So would you?
Yes, that's exactly what. And there's no. And first of all, it is all mutated over time. So there's been a kind of
Yeah.
Hegelian synthesis
Yes.
of left and right under Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault is the architect of the current
Yeah. Yeah.
ideology of the empire, which is gender ideology. And Michel Foucault is basically, he was a homosexual. He died doing what he
Yeah.
loved in the bathhouses of San Francisco. And his position is basically,
Yeah.
if you give us unlimited sexual liberation, we will not criticize your economic system. That's
Yeah.
the ideology of today. It's a Hegelian synthesis of
Yeah.
left and right, bringing together the worst parts of both of those ideologies.
That's it. Okay, do you think the radicals can be rehabilitated? The ones who are marching on the streets, the Antifa type, the purple-haired, shaved head feminazis.
Yes. Yes.
You think? Okay, good.
Yes, absolutely.
I think so too.
Nobody is beyond rehabilitation.
Amen.
Nobody is beyond rehabilitation. I've seen these stories, miraculous stories happening all the time.
I completely agree. Okay, what are your thoughts on these unelected kind of corporations and NGOs, and they somehow lobby and make policies that we all have to, like you may have experience with the SPLC or ADL, but also others like, the tech and any other company, pharma. What do you think about how much influence that they have on our life? Is the government really in charge?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
The government has been taken over by money. and money runs the entire Congress of the United States, and largely Jewish money when it comes to foreign policy. IPAC controls the American Congress. There's no question. Proof of it is that disgusting spectacle of congressmen giving 29 standing ovations to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, I saw
That
that.
is truly disgusting, and it's a proof. It's proof that the Congress is controlled by Jewish money. It's proof. You don't need it. The other thing is that what we're seeing now is the CEO / homosexual assault on state government, which happened in Indiana, where basically the people of Indiana passed a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and then the CEOs joined with the homosexuals to basically abrogate local state government. This is under assault now.
That's right. It was the founding principles that the states were to govern themselves, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So we should stick with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I know you talk a lot about the oligarchs, and I think you've mentioned this before, but just a quick one. How do you feel about tattoos? Do you consider them like a mark for cattle for the oligarchs to identify who's their obedient, high pain tolerance slave?
No, I think it's a sign of a longing for permanence.
Oh, that's deep.
In a world where nothing seems to be permanent, and so what you're doing, okay, your parents couldn't stay married, they broke up, there was all kinds of acrimony there, and so you are making a permanent commitment to a group of people who are making the same permanent commitment by having their skin tattooed. That's a permanent commitment to that group of people, and this becomes your kind of pseudo ethnic group or your pseudo family. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. And finally, what are your thoughts on Madonna? She used to sing "Papa Don't Preach, I'm Keeping My Baby," and now she's advocating for abortion at the Women's March. So what do you think? Are these people just promoting the agenda, or did she maybe change her mind?
I hadn't thought about Madonna in years. And
oh, good.
I got an email from I'm going to call her Maureen. It's not her name, but she's an Irish Catholic lady who grew up in Boston, in Dorchester, on a street where everyone was Irish and everyone was Catholic. And that street was doomed by the social engineers. And the first wave were the black sharecroppers who came in and basically busted up the block and drove those people, dispersed them into the suburbs where they became white and stopped being Irish. And then I wrote about that in the Slaughter of Cities. Okay. And I was like Jesus at the well. I told this woman everything she'd ever done in these books. So the next phase is she goes off to college. And at this point, libido dominandi kicks in. And she starts acting out sexually because everybody in the dorm is sleeping with someone. Now, the catalyst there was Madonna. She told me she was a Catholic girl, and there's Madonna. She's Catholic, and she's wearing a crucifix, and she's gyrating up there, and she's sexualizing this generation of Catholic girls. So that's why Madonna is rich and famous, because she contributed to the moral corruption of Catholic girls throughout the world.
Absolutely. And final question, what is your most pertinent advice for young people? How do they manage the culture war? How do they manage taking responsibility and having a family? What is your advice to youngsters?
Find someone to love. If you're a man, have the courage to walk across the dance floor and ask that girl to dance.
That's right. But, in this day and age, people are too afraid to do that.
Fear is useless. What is needed is love. That's my final say. Is useless. What is needed is love. So walk across the floor and ask her to dance and take a chance and form a family, and then you will have a successful life with God's help.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I will direct our viewers to go to culturewars.com, where they can find your ebooks, Kindle, and printed books, as well as on Amazon. Is there any other outlet where they can find your work? Culturewars.com
is where the books are. Obviously, a lot of YouTube videos, and Amazon Kindle is where you can find ebooks and the other paper books too. Amazon.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. And if ever you have time for another interview, that would be much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you. My pleasure. Good to talk to you. Okay. Bye.